Everyone. It's great to be here today moderating the first panel of the day on the very, very timely topic of European competitiveness. You're probably sick and tired of hearing about it at this point, but I do feel like I need to start with the Draghi report, which has kind of framed this whole issue since it came out, and it feels like really catapulted it on the agenda. I mean, we were discussing competitiveness before, but now it seems like it's the only thing we can talk about. The whole report is chock full of statistics, so I just picked one at random to introduce the panel, which is this one, which in 1990, the US GDP per capita was 16% higher than the Eurozone. By today, that gap has doubled to 30%. And we see the same thing repeating across a whole number of areas, whether that's venture capital, the price of energy, the development and maturity of the tech sector, AI, as we've been hearing about it, and so on and so on. And that's not all to say at all that Europe isn't still an excellent place for many things. You know, its social model, the way we live, its scientists are still world class, and that excellence continues to translate in a number of specialized industries. But we have reached the point, I think, where the gap between US and Europe is starting to become worrying, and we have the rise of China, which is moving up the value chain across numerous sectors, clean tech, and the automotive industry, as we've seen recently, in a very dramatic way. So the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has made it clear that she wants to make this issue a priority for her mandate, for her second mandate. It's unclear to what extent, really, this is within Brussels' control. The EU, despite its significant regulatory powers, commands really a very small part of the European GDP, and money in this matter, as in most other matters, is a key factor. So we're going to be discussing today what kind of levers policymakers can pull to improve European competitiveness, and what the outstanding political obstacles might be. I just want to remind the audience that there will be a dedicated Q&A at the final section of the panel. We'll be taking questions from the room. So please do start thinking about questions you want to ask, because I find panels are much more interesting and engaging when we get the audience input as well. And of course, please talk to us on social media, on X as it's now known, and you can use the hashtag POLITICO Competitive Week. Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished panelists on stage. Please give a warm welcome to Cristina Caffarra, the co-founder and vice chair of the Steering Committee on Competition Policy Research Network, as well as honorary professor of University College London. We have Ludovic Odor, MEP for Renew from Slovakia, and he is the vice chair of the Econ Committee in the European Parliament. And we have Christian Danielsen, state secretary to the Prime Minister's office and to the Minister for EU Affairs for Sweden. And do we have Pedro Castro Almeida as well? Yeah. Oh, there he is. Yeah. Hi, Pedro. Pedro is regional head of Europe and CEO of Santander, Portugal. So I like to start out these panels with a quick icebreaker question, just to get things moving. I just ask you keep your answer short to just a minute, which is, and I'm going to start with the Draghi report. Apologies, I'll be making a lot of references to it throughout. What's one takeaway from the Draghi report that you think is key in this discussion of competitiveness? And if you think the report is not useful, you could say that as well. I'd be interested in hearing about it. So, Christina, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I should start by doing what I always do when I speak in public. I'm a speaker coming from the private sector. You gave my affiliations, but of course I've been an economist throughout my career, and so I need to say, because it's an obligation to disclose, that although I no longer consult, in the last 5 years I've worked for Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, adverse to Google and Facebook. But this is in the past, nonetheless, needs to be said. Takeaway. Well, everybody agrees with Draghi, more or less. I don't think we need to revisit the various points. He's calling for action. He said the diagnosis is clear and it's completely shareable. From my particular vantage point, and we'll expand on it, which is competition in digital, he's saying, get your act together, get with the program, and there are various ways in which this can be done, but it's certainly a full agreement from me.
Great. Ludovic.
Thank you for the invitation. So basically for me, the main message is that although in some areas Europe is excellent in research, in digital we are lagging behind global leaders, and this has a lot of implications for not only for the economy but for our social models, for a bunch of other strategies, for our green strategy, for our a strategy for coping with the aging of the population. So we can talk a bit more about later, but this is one keyword is productivity, and we need to act.
Great. Christian, over to you.
Well, my takeaway, it's serious now. It's serious now. And there needs to be action at the European level, but there needs also to be action at national level. That's my takeaway.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely be discussing the seriousness of it later, but before we do that, Pedro?
Yes, I think it's a call to action, I would say, although it's quite negative, and now it's in vogue speaking negatively about Europe. But I think that we are facing, I would say, a frog syndrome in the way that we are declining, and looking at the competitiveness of Europe is declining every year. But I would say it's a call to action that we really need to take a look.
Okay, great. To start the discussion, I wanted to start with you, Christina, because I did want to question a little bit the focus on competitiveness. I mean, I get why we're discussing it, but why should we focus on competitiveness instead of, I don't know, things like GDP or welfare or any number of different metrics? Why have we centered on making competitiveness the center of the discussion? And is this an expression of like a certain kind of geopolitical insecurity on the part of Europe, a more dangerous world, so we start comparing ourselves with our rivals?
I think we shouldn't get hung up on semantics. Competitiveness is a word that's in the title, but essentially captures the notion that, as we keep saying, everyone in this panel says, everyone agrees, there is a productivity gap, which is essentially at the root of our expanding differences with the other kind of hyperpowers. And ultimately, if you're not productive, if you're not comparable, if you're not able to grow that productivity, you do not compete. You're not competitive on a world scale and internally. So the focus on competitiveness is just a way of saying there's a lot of problems, and we know what the diagnosis is. We are fragmented, we are behind in terms of our focus on technology, we are a mid-tech continent, we are over-regulated. All of that is in the report. Competitiveness is a way of putting it.
Sure. And do you think part of it is also that it feels like we're in a more dangerous world?
Well, we definitely are. I mean, I think we all agree it's a call to arms because finally someone comes to the fore, Mario Draghi, with his moral and intellectual authority, to say that this is no joke. We cannot continue to fiddle while Rome burns. Europe is in distress. So yes, we are in a much more dangerous situation because the US is tracking, China is tracking, and we're stuck.
Mm-hmm. Christian, Draghi singled out Sweden as a model in certain respects for how Europe should do things. what do you think about Sweden should be emulated at the European level?
Well, of course, it's a bit of a compliment, I must say. Just to say that we started, in fact, to discuss competitiveness at the end of 2002, and Sweden happened to have a presidency of the European Union in 2003. I'll tell you frankly, the first reaction from across the board was, why should we discuss competitiveness? This was January 2023, and now we are in the midst of it. So why Sweden? Well, we have also problems. We have also issues that we need to address. We have an issue of productivity gap. We have an issue also about seeing to that the IT sector grows and so on and so forth. But we have elements in Sweden which I think is that Draghi brings forward. One is market orientation. What is the strength of Sweden? Well, it's market. What's the strength of Europe? It's the internal market. So focus on that one. He also brings up another element which we believe has been essential for the fact that we are having quite a lot of unicorns. We are doing fairly well on innovation. We are doing fairly well when it comes to startups. And that's the dynamism and depth of the capital market. That's not only regulation at European level. On the contrary, it's national level. And it goes to issues such as the pension system, where we had made reforms and having a major part of the pensions savings on the stock market. And it goes towards having incentivized and making it easy to act as an individual to put your savings on the stock market. 4 million Swedes out of 10 have what is called investments savings account, which is basically putting their savings on the stock market. That's I think, are elements which Draghi brings forward as being essential for European competitiveness. And our suggestion, I had a Sherpa meeting yesterday, our suggestion is member states, have a look on that. Look on that and see what we did. You don't need to make exactly the same thing, but it's a good inspiration.
But do you think this should be done at the European level, or should we leave this capital markets regulation at the national? Because one of the big pushes we saw in Letta, and I think Draghi agrees, is greater integration of European capital markets would give the kind of dynamism, or might give the kind of dynamism and scale we see in the United States.
Both are essential.
Okay.
Both are essential. It's important to look on supervision. It's important to look into insolvency legislation. It's important also to look into other elements which will make the European capital market coming together. But essential is the demand side. Essential is to get the pension savings out on the stock market. Essential is to get individual saving, having the kind of certitude that when they do that, they will not lose it immediately, and it should be easy and easy to do it. I think both of them are essential.
Okay, great. Since we are talking about finance, I'll move over to you, Pedro, which is, as I already said, both Draghi and Letta made the finance sector one of the key elements in their respective reports. So why is finance seen as so important? Maybe this is an obvious question. And as a representative of the private sector, what would you like to see to drive this European integration forward?
It's a very good question. I was, listening to Christian, and let me share just a personal story, because we are getting, I would say, frustrated year after year about the intentions that we have. I'm a father of 7 children, and let me say that almost all of them are good students. However, one of them struggles academically simply because he doesn't study using the correct methodology and sufficient time. Fortunately, he has fantastic narrative, including all the diagnostic tools and the study techniques needed to become a good student. But he fails to put them into practice, or he fails to act. And this is also the case in Europe. So we have the Draghi's report, the Letta's report, all the measures that Christian was putting, Luden van der Weyden intentions, the awareness that our current approach to regulation and supervision is hampering growth. We are missing the banking union third pillar. So we have been talking about all these measures, but we are failing on acting and executing all the things that we have, all the intentions that we have. That's what I say that Europe is really good when I would say, in a severe crisis. We can act together. That's why the Draghi's report is really a call to action. But I'm going to mention the three things that we are interconnected, that are critical from a financial perspective, but we really are not changing. And let me say on the diagnosis part, remembering that when we look at the banking industry, in 2008, the first Eurozone bank had a market cap very similar to the first American bank. Today, the first American bank, that is JP Morgan, by market cap, represents almost the same as the first 10 Eurozone banks combined. So this is, you can see the difference. I would say that the three main topics that are really interconnected and that are critical is the banking union third pillar. It's incomplete, and in my opinion, it will remain incomplete for the foreseeable future. So I'm not going to spend time on that. The other one is the Europe capital markets. That remains underdeveloped and preventing this creation of a securitization market. And if you look at the Europe securitization markets, and let me say that Santander is one of the biggest players in Europe, but the securitization market in Europe, including the UK, is about 6%, 6, not 16 or 60, 6% of the size of the US, representing 1% of GDP, comparing with 20% of the US. And this is happened at a time when more financing for SMEs, for large companies, including equity, is needed really to overcome this geopolitical and the digitalization challenges that Europe have. And if you want Europe to become a real important player in financing, helping financing their economy, this capital markets union, it's really critical.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Pedro. I wanted to move over to you, Ludovic, as our kind of political representative on stage. I did want one more kind of bigger picture question before we start getting to some of the more nitty-gritty, which is, you know, you're from a centrist political group, Renew. Competitiveness is definitely, I think, something that Renew takes to heart as a priority. But do you think it's something that regular people, voters, care about, can engage with? I mean, it seems like they're more concerned now with like defending the welfare state or immigration. Maybe for them, competitiveness seems a bit technocratic or distant, but I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that.
Definitely. You know, we were quite successful during the campaign and not campaigning with productivity increases and total factor productivity and whatever. So that doesn't make sense. But we wanted to explain our people, and we were quite successful, that productivity is a necessary condition for our welfare state. So if we are not good at productivity, if the pie is not large enough, we cannot just distribute it, or we can distribute it evenly, but the problem is that everybody gets a small share of it. We know it quite well because we went through a socialist regime where, you know, actually we were we tried this methodology without focusing a lot on productivity, and we failed. So that is the problem. But a larger picture we wanted to paint is that actually Europe faces three big challenges: green, digital, and aging of the population. And what we need is actually also to look at the interlinkages between these three areas, because the productivity and the digital revolution that we are lagging behind is having impact also on the aging of the population and the green transformation. And maybe with two sentences, I explain the two areas. The first one is that we are not so good in the diffusion of technologies into life in Europe, and we badly need it, for example, because of the aging of the population in education, healthcare, old age care. there can be a lot of applications, a lot of new things, a lot of new services, and that is why we less agree with the Draghi report that a focus should be not only on industry, but also on services. And on green, actually, also algorithms and new technologies can help us to save a lot of energy, because savings should be the first priority when going green. So that is why we need to think these three big challenges in a package.
Great. You touched on tech, and I wanted to ask you, Christina, my impression has been that Europe's approach to tech until now has been one focused on regulating tech, trying to maybe tame the might of US tech and try and control tech rather than maybe foster European technology. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that and whether you see this approach changing in the new Commission.
Okay, we finally get into something I actually know about. So rather than generic homilies, apologies. I would like to take the question differently. I'm not standing here making any point against regulation. Okay, let the big tech companies do that. I'm not their representative. I'm not just going to argue that regulation isn't a good thing. It is a good thing, and Europe has done an amazing thing moving towards that direction. I would like to take it in a slightly different way. Start again from the Draghi report. There is a perception out there that one of the shortcomings of Draghi, this is very strongly felt in some parts of the competition community, are trying to roll back in some way regulation and enforcement, that Draghi is in some way trying to push back against competition, antitrust. And there are two reasons for that perception. I think that moral panic is misplaced. Draghi is not saying that, but he's right in pointing to two things. One, there is no question that, of course, we have focused on regulation and we've done what we've done. But the realization that we now really must embrace is that we are not going to put points on European GDP by regulating big tech. I'm all in favor of regulating big tech. We are not taming them. We are not succeeding in doing much more than something at the margin. This is the reality on the ground. It's deserving, pat on the back, but this whole collective delusion about Brussels effect is a delusion. No one out there in the world says, wow, look at the Europeans, they've regulated so great and they're growing so fast, right? And the problem is that I do not resent the fact that we focused on regulation, but I do resent very deeply the fact that regulation has taken all of our intellectual energy, our policy R&D for the last 5 years. We've given up thinking seriously about what else should we be doing. Now we have sovereignty. Let's build AI factories so the Bulgarian farmers can do precision farming. Are we kidding? This is nonsense. Okay, we are getting the big tech companies coming here. We heard it earlier saying, "Come into my parlor," said the spider to the fly. "Come and we'll give you sovereign AI factories. We will give you your sovereign data centers." Are we crazy? The reality is that we haven't thought about how to do sovereign, how to do stuff that's ours, because 90% of our infrastructure is dependent on them. And we applaud them and say, how great, they're giving us a data center. This is frankly insane. Number one. So Draghi is saying, okay, well, regulate until the cows come home, but let's kind of do something else too. Second point, telecoms. Draghi has given a complete heart attack in discombobulation to the competition community because he suggests the merger should be allowed in telecoms. Honestly, I spent half my time pushing back on my esteemed academic colleagues and esteemed competition colleagues who say he is being bought by the telcos. He is being lobbied by the telcos to death. Look, I'm not a lobby for the telco. I don't care. But the point is, he's simply saying, look, we got quite a fragmentation. We got to invest. Will somebody come out with an idea? Because investment depends on demand, or does it depend on concentration? We got 27, 34, whatever they are. Where's the industrial policy? Let's sit down and decide. In Europe, we need 8, 10, 9 groups. Let's make it happen. I don't care about doing national mergers. Then you have DG Comp having heart attacks. But that's not the point. I'll leave it there.
I'll leave the floor open to anyone who wants to respond to that. Ludovic, you seem, I couldn't tell if you were in agreement or disagreement.
Yeah, on some issues, of course, yes. On other things, I think it should be, of course, always a combination, because competition means also lower prices, telecom prices for a lot of people. So we cannot just, say that we need 2 companies or 3 companies. So it's a bit more complicated, but fine. I wanted to talk about, 3 big disturbing facts which are about the EU economy. And the first one is that we save a lot, but 1/3 of it is on bank deposits. So we have the money, but we cannot use it in the economy very productively. And that is partially also because of the lacking capital market union, but there might be also other reasons. So one thing is we should think hard how to get, one example was here, a Swedish pension system. We also have a pension system and so on. The second disturbing fact is that we spend a lot on state R&D, but very low on private R&D. And this shows actually that we lack scale. And here I agree very much that we need a more central, more global, more ambitious solution, because good enough is not enough for Europe anymore. We need excellence. We need big companies. We need actually a big presence on global markets. And the third disturbing fact is that actually Europe does very nice things, but only in crisis times. So we need a good crisis right now to implement the Draghi report.
Well, I don't know about that, but...
We're in the middle.
Christian, jump in.
I would argue we have a good crisis now, and the whole issue is now to get it moving. No, but it's serious. That is how it is. I mean, the figures that was presented by our colleague from Google are there. That was for AI, but that goes through the several sectors. I think Christina's comments were very refreshing. I think that is the kind of discussion we need to have. And we should, I would probably not land exactly in your analysis, but the discussion must be there, and we must start it, and we shouldn't have any issue that we say we can't discuss when it comes to those issues you mentioned. On moving ahead, I think we should not underestimate the regulatory issue. And here European Parliament has a role to play. We need in the future to see to that we are not building up regulations because we politically want to move in a certain direction, which then when it comes to the implementation and the cost of it is such that de facto it leads to us losing out in the kind of competition that we are in today. And that calls for the European Parliament reflecting on what kind of impact assessment are we doing when we are looking into the various changes to legislation that has been presented by the Commission. So I think that is one issue which would be interesting to have a reflection from European Parliament's point of view, how they intend to look into it. We also need to get another incentive, I would say, when it comes to the sort of European institutions and how we work. Today, there is a big incentive of producing legislation. And I think it's refreshing to see what President von der Leyen has put on the table, namely that each commissioner should have in mind how to simplify. Now, there needs to be incentives also for the colleagues in the institutions that will actually lead to something, to think in terms of getting rid of that and that piece of legislation. But I think we need to do that. We need to see to that it becomes an easier regulatory framework. And the third issue is about research that you so rightly pointed to. And we are lagging behind in Europe as regards research. And there it is, as you also rightly pointed to, it's an issue about private research to a large extent. If we look on the figures, US, EU, that is a major difference. But there is another issue into it, and that is where the research goes. If you look in Europe today, the major research areas are the old industries. It's automotive industry, it's pharmaceuticals, and so on. If you look on the US, it is what was presented by Ken from Google. It is information technology. And if you look on the productivity gap, these goes together. Now, that is not something that we can do with European directives. This is something, again, that needs to be handled to a large extent at the national level, to have a handshake between the private sector and the public sector. This is what we're going to do now, to see to that we have a structure when it comes to companies that can invest into research to the extent that is called for.
We're going to take audience questions in a minute, but before I do that, I did want to go over to you, Pedro, because we've landed on this issue of competition policy. We're talking about telcos, but banking and the so-called banking union is also a sector that is being looked at. We've recently seen play out this merger attempt by the Italian bank UniCredit in Germany with Commerzbank, and we saw the German government take a pretty firm line opposing that merger. So if we want to build this European scale, whether it's in telcos, whether it's in banking, you know, is mergers the right way to do this? Is there other things we need to do to make sure the money gets out the door? It's not just sitting in those bank accounts and it's going into productive investment. I mean, how do you see this issue, Pedro?
Carl, it's a very good question. First, let me congratulate Christina for her bold, comments, because I think they are really critical on the discussion we are having. And just a word about regulation, because I think, before asking directly to your question, because I think we must really recalibrate our attitudes towards regulation, as is explained on the latest report, which highlights this balancing between caution and ambition that is critical for Europe to become really a global leader. But the problem I think that we have in Europe is not just regulation, it's supervision. It's supervision, much more than regulation. It also has to evolve to be predictable, transparent, and allow financial stability with growth. And when we look at the SSM supervisory intrusiveness in banks, it's very high. And let me say that competitiveness is not in their incentives. And that's a problem, because they should really making much more efficient processes and be much more vigilant on breaches of the EU level playing fields, that we must ensure that the European banks are not having a disadvantage as they are on the global playing field. And looking at the banking union, the absence of a European deposit insurance scheme continues to fragment our banking sector, so preventing these cross-border mergers, and I would say at the same time stifling economies of scale. But the question regarding Commerzbank, I know it's not obvious what I'm going to say, but let me say that much more than a cross-border move, it's also an in-market move, because UniCredit has a Vereinsbank in Germany. They will foresee a merge if they acquire Commerzbank, a merge between Vereinsbank and Commerzbank. They will have synergies there. But I agree with you, Carlo. Nowadays, in the European space, I really don't understand how come a government like the German one can make comments, the kind of comments they made related to a merge between two banks in the European Union.
Wow. Thanks a lot for that, Pedro. Now I want to take some questions from the room. I don't know where the microphone... Okay, the microphone is just back there to the right. Yeah, just raise your hand. I see one right here, the gentleman in the brown at the back, and then we'll go over to you.
Thank you. Very good discussion. My name is Jussi Mäkinen, coming from Technology Industries of Finland. So it's quite clear that what Europe needs is innovations and investments. So far, the European innovation policy, the red line has been to keep the companies out and let the academia play. And now, actually, my direct question is that should the companies play a more central role in the European innovation system to deliver, as one of the panelists quite greatly raised, that to deliver also new strength areas to the Europe? Thank you.
Whoever wants to take that can jump in.
Well, look, I mean, he's right. I mean, we're not going to come out of it alone with one policy tool, with another policy tool. In fact, the whole point now is to somehow broaden the discussion. We have been doing competition policy in a silo. Industrial policy, whatever it's been done, has been done in Paris, Berlin, and the national capitals. Trade is being done in a silo. So there is a general need for sitting down and doing what I call policy R&D. How are we going to lift? Yes, the private sector is critical. We need also the public sector, because the kind of volume of investment that Draghi talks about as necessary is just not achievable by the budget and by a public sector that doesn't, by states who don't want to borrow. So the private sector is going to be essential. But you see in the United States, we had crowding in of private sector investment behind industrial policy. So this is what needs to be done, no longer operating in silos and saying, how do we do industrial policy with competition at the core? And trade policy, which is not just WTO faithfuls, but something which also helps growth. This is the discussion that needs to happen.
Please, Ludovic.
Just one sentence on it. I'm a big fan of clusters, where firms, academia, and governments together can produce good services for the citizen. And Europe has no cluster in the top 10 in the world. I guess the first is on the 12th place. So definitely we need much more cooperation with businesses.
Anyone else want to respond to that, or else we'll take another question? Okay. Yeah, the gentleman right here.
Excellent, thank you. My name is William Ostetnik. I'm from Adapt Institute from Bratislava, Slovakia. Thank you very much for an interesting discussion. Green Deal. You spoke about some obstacles to competitiveness in European Union. Is Green Deal one of those obstacles? Is Green Deal regulations one of the obstacles? And if yes, then what shall we do about it? Revise, perhaps. Thank you.
Yeah, no. I think the way we see it is that the Green Deal, or rather the green transition, is in fact something which can and is already strengthening European competitiveness. It's not only Europe that is doing this transition, it's global. We see it in the US, we see it in China, we're going to see it in other parts of the world. And the more we can be in the forefront, and in particular, the more we can apply new technologies, new ways of doing things, steel, whatever it might be, more competitive we'll be globally. So I wouldn't put the issue as being a barrier towards competitiveness. On the contrary, it's an important element for competitiveness. That being said, it is the issue what Christina points to and also Ludwig points to. We need to see that our regulation is such that it's conducive for this. Our Green Deal regulation is conducive to it. So it's probably a good idea to look into that without questioning the objectives. And we need to see to that the competition policy is such that it's going to be conducive also to this kind of approach.
We have time for one last question. Gentleman in the yellow tie at the back.
Hi, my name is Andrew Funk from Homeless Entrepreneur Foundation. My question is for you, Mr. Danielson. When we talk about competition, homelessness is a reflection on competition and how society is advancing. And my question is how you think industries can unite to reduce and ultimately end homelessness as we know it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an issue which is, a problem for most member states, housing more generally. I think the way we approach this one is that primarily is something which has to be looked on with the policy measures that you have at the national level. It's about seeing to that there are housing being built. It's also to look into how the housing market functions. And it also has to do, if you talk about those homelessness, it also has to do with the kind of social security net that you have in place. So that's the way we see it. And of course, that could be a good idea to compare how different member states are doing this. I don't think we are too enthusiastic to see a sort of European housing policy financed at the European level as something that should be developed. I don't think we are seeing that as being the essential issue for the EU for the time being.
Christina, you wanted to jump in there? No. Okay. I did want to just elaborate on that point further in that final minute, which is just, do you think there is a tension we need to reconcile between driving economic growth and maintaining some kind of social Europe? Ludovic, maybe that's one for you.
Yesterday, I listened to Draghi presenting the report, and he said that actually one of the key elements in the report is that if we do not move on competitiveness and productivity, then we can lose actually our European values, and we can lose part of our welfare state because it will not be possible to finance those. So, and to a high degree, I agree with that kind of an evaluation.
Okay, perfect. Well, we've reached the end. Sorry, I see a few more hands up, but I see the timer is running out. So I just want to thank everyone for the really great discussion. I think one thing that's emerged is a real sense of urgency. It feels like we're kind of at a do or die moment. Christina, you want to add something?
Say something
Okay,
before I
sure.
go. Just
All right.
sorry, because I think it is important in leaving this discussion. The people take away one. If I can leave you with one thing, is this notion that we need to think seriously about what digital infrastructure we put in place in Europe, which is ours. The missing piece in all of this, and it's true of other sectors, but in digital is particularly true. When you look at the dependencies we have on big tech, we are 90% dependent at the level of citizens, at the level of governments, at the level of businesses. So we have Google coming here and giving us the spiel that we need to invest. We need to let them invest on our soil and let them build things. We have capabilities, skill, people, and even the tech in Europe to do our own thing. It takes political will, and it takes investment from the public sector, and it takes the private sector crowding in. If we don't do it, we might as well give up. We are a colony. That's all I'll say.
Okay. Well, Christina, my notes say to sum up the discussion, but I don't think I can say anything more passionate than you just did. But actually, our next panel goes very nicely because it will be Lawrence Saralis, our tech and cybersecurity editor, who's moderating it, and he'll be interviewing Marcel de Groot, CEO of Vodafone Germany. We ask you all to remain seated because we'll have the next panel right away. Thanks so much. And thank you. Thank you.